You know, it feels like every single time you turn on the news, there it is again. Another story about a record-breaking storm, a massive flood, or a brutal heat wave. It's happening more and more, right? But what's the true cost of all this? I'm not just talking about money, but in actual human lives. And seriously, how can you even begin to measure something so huge? Well, that's exactly what we're going to try and decode today. Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First up, we're going to get a handle on just how big this problem is by looking at the staggering global cost. Then, we'll introduce a really powerful tool that helps us figure out who's most at risk. And that, well, that's going to reveal a pretty shocking imbalance in who's actually paying the price. Finally, we'll bring it all home and look at India as a real-world case study. All right, let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around what's at stake here, we've got to start with the big global numbers. And I'll warn you, they're almost too big to fully comprehend. Take a look at this number. Over 832,000. That's how many people have lost their lives because of extreme weather events all around the world in just the last 3 decades. It's a completely devastating toll. And what about the money, the financial cost? Well, it's just as staggering. Over that same period, the economic damage went past $4.5 trillion. I mean, that's a number so huge it's almost hard to get your head around. But look, these massive abstract numbers, they have very, very real impacts on the ground. For example, in just one recent year, the single worst affected nation was the small island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is a perfect example of how this whole thing isn't spread out evenly at all. Some places are just getting hammered way harder than others. So this brings up a really important question. How do we actually, measure this stuff systematically? How do we figure out which countries are truly the most vulnerable? To do that, you need some kind of standardized tool. And that tool, well, it's called the Climate Risk Index, or the CRI for short. It was put together by an organization called German Watch, and its whole job is to rank countries based on how badly they're hit by extreme weather, both in terms of people and money. It's designed to bring some real clarity to all this chaos. So you're probably wondering, how credible is this index? Well, for starters, it's been published every year for almost 20 years now. It uses solid data from really respected places like Munich Re and the IMF. And hey, while it's not some official binding UN index, it's definitely taken seriously. It gets cited all the time in the big global climate talks. Okay, so now we understand the tool. Let's look at what is probably its most powerful and, frankly, its most sobering finding. And here it is. This is really the core of it. Over the past 30 years, every single one of the top 10 most affected countries, they're all from the global south. We're talking about developing and less industrialized nations. This is the very definition of a disproportionate burden. It just goes to show the impacts of climate change are absolutely not felt equally. To make this global trend a little more concrete, let's zoom in on one of those countries in the top 10 and see exactly how this plays out on the ground. Okay, let's take a look at India's climate risk profile. Over the long haul, it ranks 9th in the world for vulnerability. And just look at what these numbers mean in reality. In about 30 years, we're talking nearly 430 major extreme weather events. And those events, they've affected more than 1 billion people. The economic losses are huge, of course, but it's the human cost that's just heartbreaking. Over 80,000 lives lost. India's situation is really a perfect, powerful example of that disproportionate burden we were just talking about. So at the end of the day, the Climate Risk Index, it's not just a list, it's not just a ranking, it's a spotlight on a really profound injustice. It shows us in black and white who is carrying the heaviest weight from a crisis they often did the very least to cause. And so that leaves us with a pretty critical question, doesn't it? Now that we know who suffers the most, what are we going to do about it?